So where we left off last time, we have the prophet's message, of course, and I ended right here, so I'm going to pick up right here. I will be saying more. I probably will do a third video specifically talking about the difference between the Christian understanding of Jesus and the Muslim understanding of who Jesus is. Okay? So, I did mention the Jews and Christians there, though, so we'll wait on that. In case you're wondering, where Christians had pulpits, like where a pastor or a preacher would stand in a pulpit and preach, in mosque, what developed was the idea of the staircase. So some sources say that is a depiction of Muhammad preaching. Some would say no. Of course, some Muslims believe that Muhammad should never be depicted. And not all Muslims actually agree with that, but it is a pretty common belief. So you will not see many depictions of Muhammad, especially in modern times. But this is how a Muslim preacher would preach from the staircase in a mosque. So, the Prophet. A big turning point in Muhammad's career. I don't know if career is the right word, but yeah, we'll go with career. With his vocation, I don't like that term. We'll go with career of prophet. Is the event known as the Hijra. You'll see these things spelled different ways, by the way. When we transliterate a language, meaning we take the sound that people would make and we use our letters to spell it out. So Arabic is a much different language than English. So that's why you'll see different spellings of translations. But the Hijra is a very important event. It's the going out, the emigration, the going out. At this time, essentially Muhammad and his followers were run out of Mecca, and they fled to Yathrib, which later becomes known as Medina. Okay? So, Medina is where Muhammad and his followers go, and it's really at Medina where you have the formation of the Muslim community. So that's why it's such a significant event. Notice that the first year on the Muslim calendar, this is how significant it is. The first year on the Muslim calendar starts with the Hijra. Okay? So this happened in 622. The name for the Muslim community, this is a word you'll need to know for your test in the future, is the Ummah. So when Muslims still use this term, when they talk about the Ummah, they mean the Muslim community, the community of believers, those who have submitted to the will of God as preached through the Prophet Muhammad. Okay? At Medina, Muhammad writes or has written a text known as the Constitution of Medina. I don't know if there's what the evidence is for this later. There might be later a copy of some text that's written down much later, but the story is that this Constitution of Medina is the first, I guess you might say, legal text defining what the Ummah was. All right? And I'm going to talk more about the Quran and other texts here in a second. So, when you think about Muhammad, always think of him as not just a religious leader. He was, in his mind and his followers' mind, a religious leader. He was the prophet, as we've said. But he was also a political leader. And that really becomes very important in Medina. Muhammad takes on leadership of a growing religious community, but it is also a growing community of fighters. It was almost like they create their own religious tribe in a way, and they keep bringing in other tribal groups into their fold. And Muhammad is seen as the leader. If you want to compare him to a biblical figure, Moses might be a good person to compare him with. Okay, it's unlike Jesus, who is at least the way Jesus is portrayed in the New Testament, he is not a political leader in a worldly sense. He explicitly says he's not. So a comparison with Moses might be more proper. Now, in the context of what goes on in Medina is very important. There were groups of Jews there, pretty large groups of Jews in Medina, which kind of tells you the religious nature of the areas. There were Christians also in the Hijaz. They had a lot of, Muhammad most likely had contact with Jews and Christians. He would have had to have. We know he had contact with Jews. Some of these Jews, it seems, did accept his position as a prophet. Others did not. And so some of these Jews that did not accept Muhammad as a prophet reached out to the people in Mecca who had kicked him out. And Muhammad basically accuses them of betraying him, and he either expels them or kills some of them. Okay, this is the way the Muslim narrative is told. This is the way that Muslims tell the story. So this isn't like a mean portrayal of him. This is what they say actually happened. Okay, so there is then a war with Mecca. And this took place within the context of the tribal warfares that happened all the time in Arabia. Muhammad begins leading attacks on Meccan caravans. Again, this was not a new thing for different tribal groups to raid each other's caravans. What's different about Muhammad is you have this prophetic leader of I would call it a new religion, but however you want to look at it, of a religious group leading these attacks, okay? So it's imbued with religious imagery. And the Quranic statements during this time talk a lot about where he says God has revealed these things to him, fighting the infidel. And this is the context from which jihad or struggle against the infidel arises. Okay? In 628, the Meccans agree to a truce. They're clearly losing, and Muhammad's winning. And Muhammad and the Ummah are winning. They agree to a truce, but that's not the end. Ultimately, Muhammad wins. The Meccans surrender. He goes to Mecca and essentially conquers it. What's portrayed in this document here is you have Muhammad on the horse. Notice his face is covered up. He's being led by his loyal soldiers and followers, and you see the 4 angels with him. Okay, so this is a interesting religious text there depicting this event. So Muhammad goes to Mecca. So what happens then? He basically says that God has revealed to him that the Kaaba was actually a site, a holy site before the pagans and before it became a site of idolatry. If I'm remembering correctly, he says the Kaaba is where possibly where Abraham might have almost sacrificed Ishmael, not Isaac, Ishmael. I might be wrong about that, but it was a holy site that went back to supposedly Abraham, right? So he cleanses the Kaaba. What does that mean? He gets rid of all the idols that were there, the images of other gods, and he says, Mecca is now a place of worship for only the one true God. Okay? That's why in the Muslim call to prayer, it begins with God is great, God is great. And Muhammad is his prophet. Okay? So Mecca becomes the center of pilgrimage. I kind of use this language here. So all these tribes then begin making deals with Muhammad. This is one reason why he does marry many women later as a way to cement deals with these different tribal leaders. Oh, by the way, Khadijah had died before the Hijra. So Muhammad does have many other wives at the same time, but Khadijah died before this happened. So his first wife, Khadijah, had died in 619. Now, Muhammad's triumph in this life was very short. So he dies 2 years later in 632. And he's actually buried in Medina. That's the connection there. So here is a depiction of Muhammad praying. You can kind of see, I don't know if his hair's on fire or what that depiction is supposed to mean, but praying outside the object known as the Kaaba here. All right? So, this is an interesting little story that does have importance for things that happen later. Muhammad's night journey. In the night journey, Muhammad was thought to have traveled up into the heavens. And he was thought to have traveled on the back of this creature here, as you see depicted right here. Now, according to the legend, or story, however you want to look at it, Muhammad was transported to Jerusalem and from a point in Jerusalem ascended into the heavens. Now, some stories say that this was actually physically happened to Muhammad, and others say it was like a vision or a trance, that his spirit went into the heavens. But that will have importance for how the Muslims see Jerusalem in the future. Now, let's talk a little bit about basic Islamic doctrine or Islamic teaching. One, what we know is the Quran. And you will see this spelled differently, but that's the way I'm spelling it there. The Quran is the text. It's eventually written down, right, that we know as the Quran. Literally means the recitation or the saying of the Word of God. And it's in Arabic. The words of God, according to Muslim teaching, are in Arabic. Arabic is God's language in this sense. Okay? So, the recitation of the words of God. These are the sayings of Muhammad that are, according to Muslim teaching, written down by his followers and then collected into a text. Okay? Now, you might have heard of the 5 pillars before. The 5 pillars developed pretty early in Islam, but these are basically the 5 pillars or 5 things that a pious Muslim should do throughout his or her life. And don't worry so much about knowing the Arab word there for them. Although Hajj is probably a good one to know. The Shahada is the proclamation of faith. The proclamation of faith is, and I'm quoting, I'm not proclaiming this as my faith, but I'm quoting it. Proclamation of faith is, there is no God but God and Muhammad is his prophet. That's what a Muslim would say. A person who believes that and says it would be a Muslim. I do not believe that personally, so I'm not making that proclamation of faith. I'm telling you what a Muslim would say. A Muslim is supposed to pray 5 times a day. So the 5 times, 5x, 5 times a day. Friday is seen as a traditional day of prayer, where Jews had the Sabbath and Christians had Sunday. I don't know exactly if that's how it came about, but that's seen as that's just when people gather at the mosque and pray. Saum is the idea of fasting. Fasting is very important in Islam, like a lot of religions, people practice fasting. The most important time of fasting is during the time of Ramadan. Ramadan is a time of fasting, and Ramadan explicitly, you are not supposed to eat, drink, or have sexual relations during the daytime during Ramadan. So married couples, for instance, should not be having sexual relations during the daytime during Ramadan, or eat or drink. So now there are exceptions for the eating and drinking if you're sick or kids, people that need to eat or drink. But a pious Muslim is supposed to strive to do that. So you would eat early before the sun comes up, and you wouldn't eat or drink, possibly, if you're healthy enough, not until after the sun went down, okay? 4th is the Hajj. The Hajj is the pilgrimage. That's what you actually see depicted here in a fairly modern photograph. The Kaaba is actually inside that. That's where the Kaaba is. And so Muslims go here on a regular basis. This is in Mecca today, or pretty close to today. I could probably find a little bit better picture, but that's what I got. So a Muslim is expected to try to make the Hajj once in a lifetime. And lastly, and I'll end with this, is zakat, or alms. Alms are charity or giving. So this could be to hospitals, to the mosque, to keep up the mosque, these kind of things. And you're expected to give a certain amount of alms or charity every year as a pious Muslim. And I'm going to stop right there.